Show the tape. Put it on your website. Put it on the website.
Live from Clark Studios in Rochester, New York. Broadcasting around the world. You're listening to You Made It Political, where the voice of the keyboard warrior is finally heard and the arguments presented are put to the political test. And now, here's your host, Matt Clark.
Just when you thought the situation couldn't get any more dangerous, the king decides to once again ruffle the feathers of New Yorkers, as if we didn't despise this man enough. What is he trying to do? Politically kill his career? Because he just called it on the death of his political career with this new bill that he is behind and that so many of his cronies have publicly backed. It is absolute chaos what he is doing. First, it was destroying small businesses. Then it was destroying the parents and the children's lives through putting them through educational hell. Now, he wants to take them away from you. It is unbelievable, unconstitutional, and inhumane what New York State is about to do if this bill is passed. I couldn't believe my eyes when I read the news on a legislative bill that they are trying to push through right now. And we need to demand a stop to it now before it's too late. Let's head over to the keyboard warrior cam and see what Fox News has to say about the inhumane bill that New York wants to pass. A New York Democrats bill that would allow the governor or his surrogates to detain individuals who pose a threat to public health by a single order in a medical facility or other appropriate facility sparks fierce backlash online. Thank God this is getting nationwide attention, as if it wouldn't. What parent in their right mind is going to allow any health official, unconstitutional or not, to come into your home and take your children away because they feel your child poses a health risk on the population? I don't know a single person. And if you ever want to learn or know how to trigger the next civil war, this is it right here. The amount of backlash that the American people, or New Yorkers at least, have voiced and concerned online is enough to literally trigger the next civil war. It is unconstitutional and inhumane. Let's take a look at the backlash on Twitter, because it's unbelievable how much attention this has raised. Allie has said, this is so disturbing. New York bill, this is from Allie Stuckey over on Twitter. So disturbing. New York bill allows for the removal and detention of anyone who may be a danger to public health. Yes, that's purposely undefined. Yes, it will be used at least one day to forcibly remove you or your children from your home for whatever reason the state sees fit. Now, for those of you who are a little bit behind on this bill, let me bring you up to speed here. There's a bill going around right here in New York State, and it reads something like this. Here's the amendment. Removal. So the public health law is amended by adding a new section. It's called 2120-A. You can find it. Listen, I wish this was fake news. I really did. When I saw this amendment, I immediately, before I lost my absolute shit online, I immediately looked for fake news. I Googled it. I searched hoax. I searched fake news. Sadly, it was not fake news. This is as real as it gets. I thought somebody was just trying to wind us up, but it's real. So the bill reads, or the amendment reads as follows. Removal and detention of cases, contacts, and carriers who are or may be a danger to public health, other orders. The provisions of the section shall be utilized in the event that the governor declares a state of health emergency due to an epidemic of any communicable disease. So as the governor sees fit. As far as I'm concerned, if a person sneezes, it's going to be considered a pandemic at this point. So, and not just health officials. Okay, this is the part that scares me and so many other parents to death. It's not just the health officials or the likes of Fauci that can deem this unsafe. It's now the governor or any of his cronies, for that matter. So upon determining by clear and convincing evidence that the health of others is or may be endangered by a case, contact, or carrier, or suspected case, contact, or carrier of a contagious disease, that in the opinion of the governor, remember, in the opinion of the governor, not the health officials, Governor Cuomo now can just decide at will that he would like to take your children. Opinion of the governor after consultation with the commissioner may pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health, resulting in severe morbidity or high mortality. The governor or his or her delegee, including but not limited to the commissioner, that means the governor or any of his staff or delegates, anybody he wants to appoint. Okay, so again, it has nothing to do with health officials and what they think. It has to do with the governor thinks. May order the removal and or detention of such a person or of a group of such persons by issuing a single order identifying such persons either by name or by reasonably specific description of the individual, blah, 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 blah. It just means that they can take your kids away. It is unbelievable that we have now gotten to this point. One little pandemic, and yes, I am calling this a little tiny pandemic because you can't even compare this thing to other epidemics such as Ebola, which is where this actual bill came about. This had to do, or they came up with this bill decades ago because of Ebola. They wanted to make sure that if a pandemic as severe as Ebola or the bubonic plague, for that matter, that wiped up half the planet, that they'd be able to control or detain people who were unwilling. So we have little old coronavirus come along, which, mind you, has only killed about 1 million people. Let's compare this to the flu of 1918. 50 million people died of that flu in 2 years. So it's hard for me to take a pandemic that's killed 1 million people and hasn't really killed 1 million people. Because as we know, if we go on the CDC's website and we look at all the comorbidities that have been attached to this pandemic, you will see very clearly that 94% had an underlying or potentially life-ending disease. So really only 6% has been pure COVID. So if you take 1 million and you times it by 6%, you have something like 6,000 cases. That is hardly a pandemic by anyone's definition. So Cuomo has now said we're going to take your children away from you if we feel they are a contagious risk to the public. So that's the bill. Obviously, there was massive and immense backlash on Twitter, including people like Liz Joy. This is straight up detention camp stuff in New York. A bill giving New York Governor Cuomo, Health Commissioner, or any designated official full power to remove any person or group of people from their home if deemed contagious. It's horrifying. Wake up, New York, and fight. You know what the most mind-blowing thing to me is about this entire situation? I have spoke to countless people online about this. I mean, I took this to Facebook over the weekend. I said, I cannot believe this. I got feedback and comments from people that said, you know what the scariest thing about this entire thing is? That a lot of parents or a lot of people out there are actually okay with this. They actually think that it should be up to our health officials or the governor or his delegates to control the state in this capacity. That's the scariest thing. There are so many people out there who don't see a problem with this. Now, I know I'm not the only one because there are thousands, if not millions of people who have already voiced their concerns on Twitter and Facebook and other social media. But the fact that there's even an ounce of people out there who are okay with this scares the living hell out of me. And it just goes to show the direction this country is headed in. It's inhumane. It's unconstitutional. This bill is up for consideration in New York State in regards to COVID-19. Dr. David Samadi. This is where I found this. Dr. David puts this bill online. He says, read this word for word and tell me what you think. Clearly, he knows what we all think. The point of him posting this on Twitter was to say, are you freaking kidding me? This is not right. Obviously, we've all taken to social media to voice our concerns. Laura Ingraham from Fox says, read the bill that will allow New York to detain problematic state residents during a health emergency. And I love how they're putting health emergency in quotes. It backs up what I just said about coronavirus. And if you aren't in tune with how inflated these numbers are, go to the CDC's website, look it up for yourself. People, there's a reason that the CDC publicizes all of its numbers publicly. It's so you can form your own educated opinion. It's so you can decide for yourself how you handle the situation as an adult. That's the point of having the CDC there. So go check it out. Go look at how many comorbidities are attached to these deaths, and you'll see for yourself that barely any case at all out of the million fatalities actually died from pure coronavirus. And politicians and the likes of Laura Ingraham and other journalists, nationally known journalists, are saying the exact same thing. Sarah Toon says, let's take a look at the keyboard warriors and see what they have to say, because after all, this is about what the American people think about the insanity of what's going on.
Has asthma pushed you into a smaller life? Are your asthma treatments just not enough? Then see what could open up for you with Vicen.
So a New York Democrats bill that would allow the governor or his surrogates to detain individuals who pose a threat to public health by a single order in a medical facility or other appropriate facility sparked fierce backlash online. So what kind of fierce backlash has been started? Rosalie says this has to stop. Jill says the beginning of concentration camps. They all want to erase history so bad, but yet we are well on our way to repeating it. It's a very good point. I was just having this conversation with a friend this morning. I was just having the same conversation. If we look at what's happened over the last few months by the likes of the left or our friends on the other side, the Democratic Party, they've been doing a really good job on tearing down monuments, tearing down statues, tearing down public figures that have molded and shaped this country. Whether we all agree with them or not is a different story. It's always debatable on whether we got here ethically, morally, immorally. That's besides the fact. The fact of the matter is that these statues and these monuments in our history is literally being wiped out before our eyes. We learn from history. America is only a few hundred years old, but we have learned from our European friends across the pond for thousands of years. And we are now so quick to try to forget and wipe out and neglect everything that they have done to get America to this point. So, for whatever reason, we have the left aggressively trying to wipe all this history out. Well, if we wipe this history out, we're not going to know what to expect in the future, because we all know history tends to repeat itself. So by wiping out history to try to forget what's happened is a great way to kill democracy. It's a great way for us to not know how to navigate our way through dictatorships or communism or socialism. So it's a very dangerous move what people are doing by trying to wipe out history. And I 100% agree with Jill on this point. The beginning of concentration camps, they all want to erase history so bad, but yet we are well on our way to repeating it. And that's exactly what is going to happen if we do not learn from this. John says it's a bill introduced by the Democrats. Of course they're going to lie about it, about their real intentions, just like they lie about fraudulent election votes, and every time they open their mouth. Listen, put Democrats aside for a second. Democrat, Republican, I don't care what you want to call anybody right now. I don't care who came up with the bill. It is unconstitutional. And as Americans, we need to put our foot down. This is where Democrats and Republicans should come together. This is where we should rise up as one and say, we've had enough. Regardless of what party or what side of the fence we sit on, we should come together, voice our concerns, and let our politicians know that we have had enough, that this is now getting to the point where it's outrageous. And if this bill does pass, we need to wake up and start paying attention to who we are voting for legislation. Who are these lawmakers? Who are the legislators that we are voting for? And we need to stop re-electing them. Kevin says a dangerous, slippery slope. Who decides who is dangerous and what and their qualifications to make such decisions? This type of power control behavior by the government must end. We are a country founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government is not omnipotent and knowing and all-knowing. Only God can claim that ground. He's right. It's a very dangerous and slippery slope that we are all headed. This type of behavior by any government is completely unnecessary. This is what, and I hate to bring this to everyone's attention, but this is what our founding fathers warned us about. The right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. If this isn't tyrannical, I don't know what is. Gun sales are at an all-time high for a reason, and it's not for deer hunting season. The American people have sent a very loud and clear message. And I don't think our politicians are listening, and if they are listening, they're not taking it seriously. They need to start before the American people explode, because they are at their wits' end right now, and there's only so much we can take before we snap and cause national chaos. So it behooves the government to start taking these threats very seriously. And if you don't want to call it a threat, call it a warning. But there's only so much that we can take. I heard someone say, Jay Newton, it's not the virus, it's the host. If you look one layer deeper on many, not all COVID deaths, you will find old age, selfish lifestyle, or other troubles that quarantine and stealing individual freedoms will not prevent. So it would follow that we are ruining our economy and people's lives to save those for the most who cannot be saved. How does this make sense? Change my mind. Listen, regardless of our opinion on coronavirus, regardless of the fact that whether you think it's a very serious issue or whether it's a joke or whether it's a hoax, the Constitution cannot take the backseat to a disease ever. You don't think our founding fathers went through some of the most horrific plagues and diseases of their time at a scale that they would laugh at if they knew what we were dealing with today? Compared to what they went through, this is hardly a sneeze. The Constitution does not take the backseat to a virus ever. Full stop. So it's a great comment. I think it's one that we need to digest a little bit further. But our individual freedoms will not prevent. It's a very good comment. Great feedback. Jerry says, I think the governor has already killed a lot of elderly people, so maybe he is the biggest threat. Lock him up. How many stupid mistakes does Governor Cuomo need to make? I mean, if he's intentionally trying to not get reelected in 2022, he's doing a phenomenal job. Let's take a look at the long list of absolute moronic decisions he has made. It all started with the lockdown. Okay, actually, it started before the lockdown. It started with killing thousands of elderly. That's where Governor Cuomo's gone wrong. And if you still like this guy after that, you deserve to be put in an elderly home with the rest of them because you're not thinking correctly. Okay, you're going senile if you actually think that Governor Cuomo was right about putting all these elderly people in nursing homes to die. So thousands of people have died in nursing homes because of Cuomo. 100% because of Cuomo. There's no getting around that. So when people say things like, oh, well, New York City is just going to keep reelecting them because they're just not smart in New York City, I don't believe that. I think New York City is just as pissed off with this guy as the rest of New York State is. I don't think it's down to the rural areas anymore and the city. I think New York City has finally woken up after the elderly have been killed, after their businesses have been ruined, and after they've killed the economy. A lot's happened. This guy's got a rap sheet a mile long right now. He's being sued both personally and politically. He's under attack. And he now comes out supporting this law, this bill that we hope to God will not become law. He's now allowed Orchard Park to be open in Buffalo, New York. So now fans can go watch a football game, but children can't go to school. So I think he's got his priorities all wrong. I don't think he's listening to New Yorkers. I think he's going down a one-way track to political suicide. I don't think there's any chance whatsoever this guy is getting reelected. And you better believe, as soon as I find out who the real candidates are, the Republican candidates, I will be 100% backing them politically, and I will do everything I could to get this man out of office. And that fight, by the way, starts right now. If we're furious with him, if we want him out, if we have a problem, we cannot wait until 2022 to start addressing it. We need to address it now. When the locks down are lifted, when the children are back in school, when coronavirus disappears, we cannot forget the insanity, because it will happen again if we allow it. There's a new strain of coronavirus now in the UK. Apparently, it's a lot worse. I don't think I would have believed it until I actually heard from some friends that things are pretty bad over there. If that's true when it comes to New York, whether we get through it this time or maybe a couple years, another virus explodes onto the scene, causing Cuomo to now rise up again and start taking people away or detaining them or holding them, we need to put an end to all this right now. We don't want to wait until it's too late. Somebody said, well, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen that they're just going to take your child away. And my reply was, it's not going to happen until it finally does. And is it going to be your kid that it happens to before we start raising a stink? So we need to address the situation right now. We need to let our legislators know and our politicians know we will not tolerate this. Because it would be nice to address this peacefully rather than violently. Because I've seen some very harsh statements online, and there's a lot of people out there who will die, understandably, before they ever let anybody come into their home and take their child away. Let's head back over to the Keyboard Warrior cam, see what other people have to say about the insanity and the ridiculousness of the governor and anybody that he delegates to come into your home and take your children away or detain you yourself, keeping you away from your family because you deem a threat. Before we go back to the comments, I'd also like to say one more thing. Here's another reason that I'm deathly afraid of anybody taking my son away from me, which would never happen in a million years. I would be one of those people, I'd end up prison or dead because you're not taking my son away against my will ever. I can care less if there was a 99% death rate. You're not taking any family member away from me. And here's why. I don't trust what's going to happen when they're out of my sight. It's not up to anybody how I protect or cure myself or my children. It's up to me and my wife. It's not up to the health officials. They can recommend They can suggest, they can advise, but it's not up to them to give them a dose, to give them medicine until I agree. So when they take your children away from you, what if situations get worse? What if your child declines? It's not as simple as, oh, we're just going to take them away, we're going to give them a vaccination, or we're just going to hold them here for a little bit, and we'll give you back to them in a few days. What if they decline? What if then you're not allowed to go see them and be by their bedside while they're sick and possibly dying? So instead of waiting for all that to unfold, it's just safer that we put our foot down and say, no, they're not leaving our sight. That is not happening. Because look at our elderly in the nursing homes. We can't be by their side. So what makes you think you're going to be allowed to be by your child's side? So for those of you who think, what's the big deal? They're just trying to protect the population. I'd like to see how you react when they do that to your children. And we'll see if you have the same thought process as they're dragging them out the door and putting them in a little white van and off they go to God knows where. And maybe you'll see them again. Maybe you won't. Let's take a look at the other comments here. The keyboard comment can. Eric says, cattle cars and tattoos coming right up. Thank you all for voting Democrat. Now listen to your masters that you voted in. Democrats should be the first ones in line for all the new surprises coming out in 2021. That's true. That's a very good point. You guys put these guys in office. You go get your vaccine. You tell us how it goes in a few years, and then the rest of us will decide if we're okay with it. You be the experiment. You have your children be carted off because you keep voting for draconian Democratic politicians who keep coming up with heinous and insane laws. How about you pay the tax bill for all the cities that have been burnt down and destroyed, rather than the American people having to suffer for all the chaos and insanity that happened over the summer? Pamela says, so does this mean they will finally take care of the homeless and provide them with what they need? Great point. And I wouldn't be surprised, because look what they're doing with the prisons. For some reason, we're letting all of our prisoners out of jail to make room in places like Los Angeles, to make room for people who commit underground COVID crimes. And by that, I mean gatherings of more than 10 people or more. So we're letting prisoners go free to make room for people who don't comply with COVID lockdown. We're letting murderers go free. We're now prioritizing drug addicts ahead of senior citizens. Drug addicts and prisoners are some of the first to get the coronavirus vaccination in Democratic states. I'm not sure Governor DeSantis down in Florida is abiding by the same policies. I doubt Texas is abiding by the same Democratic COVID lockdown playbook. How many more have to leave these states for these governors to understand? If they don't stop being heinous and ridiculous and unconstitutional, they're not going to have many constituents left. The only thing you're going to have is high sky taxes and lockdown measures and mask wearing, possibly for the rest of your life. David says, sounds like Germany started in the 30s, ended badly, if you remember. It's not going to end good. Gun sales are at an all-time high. You can barely find ammunition. It's got to tell you something. And I am not one for violence. The last thing I ever want to see this country go down is the path of civil war. But I'll tell you, if anything is going to trigger the next civil war in this country, it's a stupid bill like this. This is what's going to do it. I could write the playbook myself. How to trigger America's next civil war. Come in and take my kid. Because I'm telling you, the person who fires that first shot, there's going to be no turning back. Wendy says, stormtroopers release pedophiles, rapists, etc., but detain people trying to live their lives? The democratic liberal way to legislate. We were just talking about that. All wrong, got their priorities all wrong. They're releasing pedophiles, they're releasing rapists, they're releasing murderers, but they're detaining people for trying to save their lives. Blake says, would it take much for people to resist, though, these days? And with as many firearms Americans own, I think most cops will be afraid to go door to door and yank people out of their homes. I would. Not everyone would be that okay with it. Give in super easy. Listen, our sheriffs have already said, we're not busting up Thanksgiving dinner. So how do you expect a sheriff to literally drag a child away from a parent? What sheriff in their right mind is going to do that? So even if this bill did get passed, what law enforcement agency is going to do this? Because as far as I'm concerned, when CPS can't get the job done, they call law enforcement. Law enforcement shows up. Yes, if there's a child in danger because of the parents, it's understandable that they'll take that child away. If there's drugs involved that can harm a child, they will remove that child. But not for the flu, not for a virus with a 98.9% survivor rate. Where's the sense in any of this? So we're releasing pedophiles, rapists, murderers, but we're detaining people for trying to save their lives. It's a great comment, Wendy. Joseph says, how about we the people just depose and imprison him to life without parole for all the elderly he has murdered? Imagine if you accidentally or negligently killed thousands of people. I don't think you'd be roaming the streets, would you? You'd probably be in prison for the rest of your life. He surely falls into the dangerous to society designation. And we'll end with this one. Linda says, so it begins the roundup of individuals who don't comply with government regulations. Are they going to reopen campus colleges like they did during World War II to the Japanese Americans? Communism is already here. It's a great comment. It's a phenomenal one to end on today. Governor Cuomo soon will be allowed to come into your house and take away your children, or anybody that he so chooses delegates, if they deem your child or you are a risk to the population from a contagious and infectious perception. America is starting to lose grip with reality, and sadly, half the country doesn't see it. We talk about socialism, we talk about communism, we talk about it's coming. I'm afraid socialism is already here. Hence the reason Mitch McConnell keeps blocking this vote. He wants nothing to do with handing out free socialist crack to the American people. And rightly so. It is a great way to send this country into financial ruin. It's a great way to send inflation through the roof. Couples making $140,000 do not need a check for $4,000 because they mismanaged their finances. And this is the argument and the complaint that so many Republican politicians have. Of course, they want the American people to have money. They don't want to see them suffer, but they want us to get back to work, open up the gates, let us go out and earn our own living again. This is their argument. They are sick of the draconian measures. They are sick of state governors individually making horrific mistakes and then going to the federal government to bail them out. And rightly so. We do not need to be handing out any more socialist crap. We do not need to be locking American people down. We do not need the government in our affairs on a matter that the health officials were the only ones who were supposed to be running all this time. But here we are, the American government jumping on the bandwagon to force their socialist agenda down our throats. And they're succeeding unless we finally rise up and do something about it. Thank you guys so much for joining me today here at You Made It Political. This is a busy, busy week, explosive week. We are going to be live in Washington, D.C. this Wednesday, January 6th. Commentary, interviews, rallies, protests. We're going to bring you all the action. That is Wednesday, January 6th. So stay tuned. Tune in for that. Tomorrow, Georgia's up. We got the Georgia State runoff. We'll be covering all that, and we'll have plenty of commentary on it. God, this is going to be an exciting and very explosive week. Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of the day. We will see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
Thanks for listening to You Made It Political with Matt Clark. Be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show, or leave us a review on iTunes. And if you like our show or want to know more, check out youmadeitpolitical.com.